Hey everyone, welcome to part 7 of this audience Q&A series. As always, if you have a question you'd like answered next time, leave it in the comment section of this video. And if this is your first time watching one of these videos, check out the playlist of the other 6 parts, because not only are these videos always fun to watch, there's a chance your question might have been answered already. So with that out of the way, let's get right into it, starting with Khalid Sarad, who asks, can you pick 7 characters from anime for each of the main Lantern Corps? So for red, I go with Power from Chainsaw Man, and not even because of how angry she is. Power is a supernatural demon that controls blood, and she fights using construct weapons made of blood. 2 big things to remember about the Red Lantern Corps is that ritualistic blood magic is a big part of how the Red Lanterns harness the emotional spectrum, and very few Red Lanterns have ever been able to form constructs. To me, Power feels like a missing puzzle piece that could bridge a few gaps in how the Red Rings work, and greatly improve the level of control the individual Red Lanterns have over their own abilities. For orange, I go with Mine from Ascendance of a Bookworm. This is an adult from the modern day who died and was reborn as the youngest child of a poor family in a medieval pre-industrial world. We are shown over and over again that she has the ability to drastically improve the quality of life for everyone around her by applying basic modern knowledge about things like food preparation, but she only ever does it when it serves her single-minded goal of obtaining books. This kid loves books more than she loves most living things, and if helping you will somehow lead to her getting books, then you're in luck. But most people aren't that lucky. For yellow, I'm picking Akane Shinjo from SSSS Gridman for actually a bunch of reasons that I don't want to get into here, because that show goes to some fascinating places and you should watch it. And if you do watch it, you need to finish it, or you won't see what I mean. This is a show where the final frame of the final episode completely recontextualizes everything you thought you knew about the whole season. For green, I'm picking Hitori Goto from Bocchi the Rock. I'll be honest, I was originally going to put literally any shonen protagonist in this spot, but then I remembered that Bocchi is an anime Jessica Cruz. She's an extremely anxious person who learned to play guitar as a way to hopefully make friends, and watching her slowly build self-confidence while continuing to spiral down into the depths of anxiety makes for an immensely satisfying experience. This show has been memed to death, but that doesn't matter. It's genuinely great and is one of my favorites from last year. For blue, I'm going with Alphonse Elric from Full Metal Alchemist. First his mother dies, then his brother performs an incredibly reckless experiment to try and resurrect her, resulting in both of their bodies being mutilated. Now, Alphonse is nothing but a soul that's been bonded to a suit of armor, as he and his brother travel the world searching for knowledge that could restore their bodies to normal. And through all of it, Alphonse rarely ever gives in to despair. He barely even exists at this point. He may not even technically qualify as human anymore. And the longer their journey goes on, the less likely it seems that they'll actually find what they're looking for. But Alphonse still has hope. He refuses to give up, and he doesn't let his brother give up either. According to the rules that govern their world, the goal they're shooting for should be functionally impossible. But that's not enough to convince Alphonse that it can't happen. Because without hope to drive them, the Elric brothers really will have lost everything. For Indigo, I'm picking Violet Evergarden. She is perfect for this. A former child soldier who never knew anything other than violence, but now the war is over and she's trying to learn about her own emotions by experiencing the stories of other people. For Violet, an indigo ring wouldn't be a prison, it would be a set of experiences that she's desperate to understand. And my Violet Lantern would be Spike from Cowboy Bebop. Spike's entire life was turned upside down when he fell in love with his friend's girlfriend, to the point that he had to fake his own death and go into hiding, or else mob hitmen would kill him. And that's just the beginning of his troubles, but that'd all be worth it if only the woman he loved had followed the plan so they could run away together. Instead, Spike is left with a hole in his heart so big that he barely thinks of himself as being alive anymore, which is why he can do so many reckless things over the course of the series. Spike is one of the most outwardly upbeat, emotionally devastated characters I think I've ever seen, and the pain he feels is directly proportional to how much he still loves the one person who will never be able to be in his life. And as a bonus, I'm going to make my Black Lanterns the cast of Zombieland Saga. 7 girls who died at different times over the last 150 years, who were brought back as zombies to form an idol group to revitalize a small town on its last legs. God, I love anime. And my White Lantern would be Goku, because he refuses to ever just stay dead. The One Who Watches asks, are you familiar with Doctor Who? And if so, what power ring would best suit the Doctor? And do you think that changes at any point, either with their regenerations or at key points like the 10th Doctor declaring himself the Time Lord victorious? I was huge into Doctor Who for a few years, from 2005 to 2013. I caught Christopher Eccleston's first season when it first started airing, and kept watching all the way through the David Tennant and Matt Smith series. I fell off after that, and still haven't seen any of Peter Capaldi or Jodie Whittaker's seasons, but I will. This question is actually making me want to go back and rewatch all of this, from Eccleston up to the present. I also haven't seen any classic pre-2005 Doctor Who. During my huge Doctor Who phase, most of that material wasn't readily available, so I was content to experience the older eras through the nostalgic nods present in the newer episodes. But as for what ring the Doctor would wear, yes, I do think it would change from one regeneration to the next. Christopher Eccleston's Doctor would be an ultraviolet lantern. This was the hardest one to nail down because his primary trait was regret. He feels extreme guilt over what he had to do to end the Time War, and would gladly sacrifice himself if he thought it would make things right. I thought about giving him an indigo ring, since that ring has the strongest ties to the concept of repentance, but I went with ultraviolet because its light can be directly powered by his regret and guilt, as well as being a nice visual metaphor for how well he is or is not dealing with it. David Tennant's Doctor would get a red ring. His fun, optimistic exterior hides an intense anger that occasionally comes out, and when it does, he can be pretty terrifying. Speaking of which, Matt Smith's Doctor would get a yellow ring. By this point in his extremely long life, the Doctor has made such a name for himself across the universe that he can stare down an invading armada of warships from dozens of worlds and scare them away without any weapons or even a plan. Just his presence is enough to make them think twice about making a move. The Doctor does a lot of good, but the more high profile and extreme his achievements are, the more his enemies fear him. That's why I think anyway. Maybe some of that is way off. I don't know. I literally haven't watched this show in 10 years. But I think I'm going to change that pretty soon. Trevor Smith asks, would you be interested in Alan Scott becoming the lead character of the main Green Lantern book again, or do you think he should stick with the JSA? The JSA is such a good group, and when done right, they feel like a big family. I really don't mind it being the primary place for Alan Scott content, though it's been so long since he's had a proper solo outing that I would be curious to see what happens when he gets the spotlight apart from the rest of the JSA. But ultimately, I wouldn't want him to be away from his friends for too long. All that to say, yes, I do think there should be a new Green Lantern book starring Alan Scott, at least for a while. Lord Vader wants to know, what do you think was the reason that Hal was not liking Earth in Grant Morrison's run? Do you think that can be explored in the Jeremy Adams run? Hal doesn't like anything that's too close to an ordinary, mundane life. One of the things that scares him the most is the thought of having to settle down in one place and work a normal job. It's not that he hates Earth or anything, it's just hard for Earth to live up to your expectations once you've seen the infinite wonders the universe has to offer. To Hal, living on Earth can sometimes feel like having his wings clipped, being forced to settle for a quote-unquote normal life when he knows that life has so much more to offer way out there. His favorite thing about Earth is that Carol lives here, and sometimes he gets to fly planes here. As for the new series, I certainly hope they explore this, since the entire premise seems to be Hal stuck on Earth during some kind of cosmic quarantine. And the cover of issue number 2 makes it look like he's living in a trailer with Kilowog, so there had better be some hilariously frustrating scenes of Hal Jordan trying and failing to live like a normal human being and hating everything about it. Cinder and Coyote asks, with the second Ruby DC comic run out and the upcoming Ruby Justice League movie coming out, I want to ask what you would think of a Ruby Green Lantern event like Blackest Night in the Ruby world. And what Lantern characters would you bring specifically? I think Kyle, Guy, and Jessica Cruz would be my choice for Earth Lanterns. Blackest Night happening in the world of RWBY could be even more dangerous than when it happened in the DC universe. RWBY takes place in a post-apocalyptic world, which is why their planet is called Remnant. So the number of Black Lanterns that could rise up is unusually high. I don't think the Huntsmen or Huntresses would do very well against Black Lanterns, but it would probably still be fine since RWBY was born with silver eyes that give her the ability to emit a blinding white light that can insta-kill most monsters. It's a rare trait that was apparently gifted to humanity by the god of light and is fueled by a strong desire to preserve life, which sounds an awful lot like the light of creation from DC Comics, meaning that RWBY and anyone else with silver eyes basically has access to White Lantern powers, and would be key in stopping the Black Lanterns. As for what lanterns I'd bring over, I'd pick someone who could benefit from the unique circumstances of this story. We know from the various RWBY Justice League crossovers that DC characters change to better fit RWBY's world when they enter it. So I'd like to see what happens to Nort when he travels to Remnant. He's already an anthropomorphized dog, so logically he would become a faunus, which would ironically make Nort the closest to a biological human he's ever been. Facundo Chiari asks, the Emerald Empress is a villain of the Legion of Superheroes with roughly the same abilities as a Green Lantern, with the Eye of Ekron acting as a power ring. That being said, what do you think if there was a present-day Emerald Empress? Could that be Yira Sinral, or do you think it should be another character? I think it would be cool to see the present-day origins of the Emerald Empress legacy. They've played around with it before. During the year-long Series 52, we found out that the Eye of Ekron came from a Green Lantern spaceship that was shaped like a giant head for some reason. I'd love to see them introduce a new character, a female Green Lantern who's a scientist in charge of researching old Guardian technology, who sees the potential of the Eye, and thinks it can go beyond the limits of a ring. At first, she's entirely motivated by trying to help the Corps, but as time passes, she becomes radicalized, takes the Eye and leaves her ring behind, and goes out to pursue her own agenda for the universe. We got a batch here from Tevya Smolka. If we get a sequel to the Battle of the Super Sons animated movie, which Green Lantern or any Lantern member from any Corps would you like to see team up with the Super Sons and why? I would love to see Jessica Cruz or maybe that rookie Green Lantern we got in the Adventures of the Super Sons series. Seeing them use that Green Lantern cadet would be great. I've always wanted there to be younger Lanterns that could join the teenage heroes. They finally started to play around with that by introducing Kelly, but the more the merrier, especially since John and Damian already know this kid. With the upcoming Philip Kennedy Johnson and Jeremy Adams Green Lantern books coming this year, which Green Lantern books are you excited to read and why? And do you think these new Green Lantern books are going to be better than the last Green Lantern book we got last year, or be more confusing? Jeremy Adams and Philip Kennedy Johnson are two really, really good writers who both just came off of critically acclaimed fan-favorite runs on other DC books. And the fact that they're both going to be working on Green Lantern for the foreseeable future is, I think, a very good sign that we can look forward to a couple of high-quality books. The actual quality of their runs will ultimately come down to the kinds of stories they want to tell and what editorial decides to do. But that's always true about literally every writer on every book, even the ones that we hold up as masterpieces. So I'm going to assume everything is fine until they show me something that isn't. If you did a crossover with Transformers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Star Wars, crossing over with Green Lantern in his universe, I'm just wondering which characters from either franchise would join each Lantern Corps, and what type of story would you tell with each franchise? Okay, so, Transformers. The Autobots are petitioning to get Cybertron membership status in the United Planets, because that would allow them to get aid in their endless war against the Decepticons. The United Planets recognizes that granting membership to Cybertron would gain them access to Energon, an extremely useful power source, and thus asks that a pair of Green Lanterns be sent in to assess the situation and help deal with any immediate Decepticon threat. Simon Baz and Stell arrive just in time to help Ratchet, RC, and Wheeljack prevent an attempt to assassinate Optimus Prime. Megatron knows what Optimus is doing and wants to prevent Cybertron's United Planets membership at all costs because he knows how much trouble it would make for his forces. Ninja Turtles. Kyle and Jessica are chasing a ship through hyperspace when the engine explodes and throws them into the Ninja Turtles universe. Kyle is immediately thrown off by this version of New York being different from the one he used to live in, but gets over it fast when he realizes how weird and cool everything about the Turtles is. Kyle can't stop geeking out over ninja stuff, and loves their weird homemade vehicles, like the Turtle Van and the Blimp. Jessica, on the other hand, bonds with Michelangelo over their shared love of video games and weird pizza, and has a very peaceful, calming experience meditating with Master Splinter. Donatello thinks the Lanterns can get home by traveling through Dimension X, which means getting past Krang and the Technodrome. This fight would start with a life-size Godzilla construct with Ninja Turtles riding on its back and only get weirder from there. And as for Star Wars, Guy Gardner goes to Mos Eisley and opens a new chain of warriors right across the street from the cantina. Most of his staff is made up of rookie Green Lanterns, who are only working there because Guy told them they get extra credit towards earning their badges, which is a lie. What ensues is a petty but hilarious war between two rival businesses trying to be the #1 bar on the planet, and it involves just as many bounty hunters and constructs as you'd expect. If we get a Young Justice Season 6, what other Lantern Corps members or Green Lantern characters do you want to appear on the show? Guy Gardner has already appeared on Young Justice, but I've always wanted to see him take an active role in training the younger heroes. Guy was canonically a gym teacher for a while, so I'd love to see him bring that high school coach energy while he makes the kids run drills. I'd also like to see Brother Worth of the Blue Lanterns, because his peaceful, meditative nature would help some of the hotheads on the team learn how to mellow out a bit. With Wally West and Linda Park having a third kid on the way, I'm just wondering if a Green Lantern ring showed up at Wally's home, do you think their third child would go for the ring or stick with their speed powers? Because I personally would love to see this kid embrace lantern powers and speed powers, combining both. You're actually describing a character that already existed in the 1990s named Green Lightning. Her real name is Allie Rayner West. At some point in the future, one of Kyle's descendants has a daughter with one of Wally's descendants. She inherits both her mom's speed and her dad's power ring, and decides to use both to be a superhero, although she has trouble using both sets of powers at the same time. She was introduced in Green Lantern's Circle of Fire, a story that I should probably cover sooner or later, because it seems to be coming up in conversation more and more lately. With the upcoming Across the Spider-Verse animated movie coming out this year, do you believe that DC will give us a similar style of animated movie? And if so, which DC characters do you want to see it focus on? The success of Spider-Verse has not gone unnoticed, and we're finally starting to see a wave of animated movies come out that are very blatantly influenced by that movie's visual style. And that trend will continue as long as these movies and the Spider-Verse sequel perform well. If the trend keeps up, then yes, I do think we'll eventually see an animated DC movie in a similar style. As for the characters I like to see, I mean, obviously I'd want to see a group of Green Lanterns, but honestly, I have a hard time thinking of a character or family of characters that wouldn't look amazing in that art style. Imagine how reality could warp around the Flash when he runs at top speed, or how the entire scene could come to life when Black Canary lets out a sonic scream. I really don't think there's a bad answer. That kind of animation would get me excited about any DC project. With Stargirl and the Lost Children introducing all of these kid characters for the JSA, and one of them being the daughter of Alan Scott's Red Lantern enemy, do you think this character will interact with Jade and Obsidian? And if so, how do you think their interaction is going to turn out? I have to imagine that most of the reason you create Ruby at all is to have her interact with Jade. At first, I expected her to be treated like Jade's evil doppelganger, and they'd be enemies just like their dads were. But then we saw Ruby as a member of the JSA. Yes, she's carrying on her father's legacy as the Red Lantern, so I'd have to imagine that she and Jade won't get along too well considering the history between their two families. But I think we're going to see a more complicated relationship between these two than the standard hero-villain rivalry. Maybe Obsidian understands Ruby better than Jade does, and is trying to get them to become closer. Or maybe I'm wrong, and Jade totally loves her, and they're best friends who hang out all the time. We'll just have to wait and see. Facundo Chiari asks, in what order were all prototypes of the Power Rings made? So let's see. To talk about the earliest rings, we first have to talk briefly about Volthoom and his travel lantern. Volthoom was a scientist from Earth-15. He and his mom were the first beings in the multiverse to discover the emotional spectrum, and they built a device called a travel lantern to harness it, so they can go anywhere in existence and find a way to save their world from destruction. No, there has never been a reason given for why they made this piece of technology into a lantern. This was all 10 billion years ago, by the way. Volthoom lands in the main DC universe and meets the Malthusians, long before they started calling themselves the Guardians of the Universe. He teaches them about the emotional spectrum, and they all start working on it together. Eventually, while still working with Volthoom, the Guardians would expel all emotions from their bodies, and from all of that emotional power manifested a ring, as if the emotional spectrum was repaying them for their sacrifice. This was the first ring, and it could access the entirety of the emotional spectrum, making it incredibly powerful while also having a supremely negative effect on the mind of the user. Eventually, Volthoom lost his mind and began killing Malthusians left and right. So a guardian named Raimi destroyed the travel lantern and used its shattered pieces to create the first 7 Green Lantern rings. He didn't have time to make rings that could harness more than one aspect of the emotional spectrum, and Willpower was the least chaotic, so he went with that. These rings also lacked proper safeguards, since they were a first draft made in a hurry. So that was all 10 billion years ago. 6 billion years ago, Raimi tried again, and this time he made the Phantom Ring. It was basically his attempt at recreating the first ring, and again, it could access the entire emotional spectrum, but had no safeguards. Raimi thought Green Lantern rings might be too limited, and a ring like this one was worth pursuing. The rest of the Guardians freaked out and banished Raimi until he could figure out how to destroy the Phantom Ring, which he never could. Now, somewhere in there is when Krona builds his gauntlet. We're never given a specific time frame, just billions of years ago, but we do know a few things. We know it was built before there were any green rings. We know that it was built before Krona was exiled for viewing the origin of the universe. And we know that Krona's exile already happened by the time Volthoom was walking around with the first ring. And since the Guardians learned about the emotional spectrum from Volthoom in the first place, that means Krona had to have built it somewhere in between Volthoom's arrival and the creation of the first ring. Maybe I got some of that wrong, I'm not sure. The history of the Guardians is very, very convoluted. If there's an early ring prototype that I forgot to include, tell me in the comments. Now, there are 2 other rings I can think of that we should touch on, even though they're not part of continuity, starting with one that I used to think was in canon, the White Ring from Batman Universe. It's unclear how long ago this ring was made, but it's been long enough that the ring's programming has become corrupted, making the ring itself extremely dangerous to use. According to the ring's AI, a White Lantern ring and battery are tools meant to be used by members of the Green Lantern Corps. This could just be the AI malfunctioning, or maybe it represents a path forward that the Guardians at one point considered. Either way, we have no clue how old this ring is. Then there's the Universal Ring from the Green Lantern Planet of the Apes crossover. In this reality, it seems that Raimi's attempt to make the Phantom Ring failed, and some other Guardian who had no idea what he was doing built the Universal Ring, which is basically the exact same thing as the Phantom Ring. This was deemed to be too dangerous, so the Guardians opened up a hole in reality and threw the Universal Ring into the world of the Planet of the Apes. Lexi Bedingfield asks, if you were to give some of the core characters from Invincible power rings, what ring would you give to each character? I haven't read Invincible in a very long time. I read the first 3 issues as they were coming out, but at that point I was buying way too many comics every month and had to drop something. And it was easiest to cut Invincible since it had just started and I wasn't invested in it yet. And once I found out the series got pretty gory, I had no real motivation to go back. But based on what I do know, Invincible himself would be a Blue Lantern. Mark wants to really be the hero his dad pretended to be. He believes in those ideals and won't give up on them. And Omni-Man would be a Yellow Lantern. The Viltrumites in general are planetary conquerors motivated by the fear of their own extinction, and to me that screams Sinestro Corps. That's unfortunately where I have to cut it off, because I never got to know any of the other characters. Tom Holloran asks, what do you think of John's changing the Green Lantern power from an esoteric energy that required willpower to shape and use to something that is explicitly willpower in energy form? He likely did this to facilitate the other cores, but how exactly do their powers work? Because they would still have to will their constructs, beams, etc. into creation. You don't rage or compassion or fear something into being, it takes will. So what makes a Green Lantern's will different from the other cores' will? I think changing it into literal willpower was a great move. It's a stronger, simpler concept that allows writers to more deeply explore both the individual characters and the overall mythos. Before that, nobody working on the books could even keep straight what the green energy was supposed to be. Sometimes it was light, sometimes it was plasma, sometimes it was psychic energy from the minds of the Guardians. And it could be used for so much absurd stuff that despite Green Lantern having changed into a science fiction franchise from the Silver Age onward, the rings may as well still have been magic. The change to willpower actually puts some much needed logistical limits on what the rings can do. As for every other color lantern needing to exert willpower to do things, yeah, you're exactly right. All the emotion in the world would go to waste if you didn't have the will to act on it. Everyone has willpower. Green Lanterns just have way more of it. Same with every different color lantern and their primary emotion. All of them have the full range of emotions, just in different proportions, with their dominant emotion fueling their rings. The only exception to this is the Indigo Tribe, since not being able to feel emotion is their whole point. We got a few here from Zaire Bassoon. What is your opinion on unique rings like Hal's self-made one, John's tattoo, and Joe's self-charging one? Do you think more lanterns should have unique rings? I love them. I love anything that further explores the nature of these power sets. Joe's ring shows us that willpower isn't a single standardized thing. Different people have different kinds, and that can impact the story and the character in big ways. John's tattoo ring is perfect for a power that comes from your own repressed feelings or inner strength, where there is no external component at all and you are your own ring and battery. And talking about Hal's homemade ring, Hal Jordan is synonymous with willpower. So what happens when we blur the line between Hal and his own will? Where does Hal Jordan end and Green Lantern begin? And is there even a difference anymore? From a storytelling perspective, the best thing about all Lantern rings is the way they let you explore the nature of who these characters are. So the more creative and specific those rings get, the better. Is there anything about Green Lantern that you absolutely hate or dislike? I absolutely hate the fact that some of the most famous moments of female comic book characters being treated like dirt happened in Green Lantern. I think at some point, all of us have wanted to see comics taken more seriously. Well, part of that means growing up and cutting this shit out, because there's never any excuse for it. How would you reintroduce Green Lantern to media after basically not appearing anywhere other than comics after that one movie? I think the smartest move is to piggyback on the success of a more popular character. It works basically every time. My first exposure to Green Lantern was reruns of Challenge of the Super Friends that I watched back in the 1980s. I tuned in because I liked Superman, Batman, and Robin, and just happened to get exposed to characters like Aquaman, Wonder Woman, and Green Lantern. Back in 1999, they introduced Green Lantern into the DC animated universe as a guest star in one episode of Superman the Animated Series. This was episode 7 of season 3, so the Superman cartoon had built up a sizable fan base by that point, and for many people of a certain age, that was their first exposure to Green Lantern. And that's not even taking into account how an entire generation of people only know what Green Lantern is because John Stewart was in the Justice League cartoon. As Green Lantern fans, we understandably get irritated at how much more attention is given to other franchises, especially Batman, but the popularity of those other characters can be leveraged to make more people start paying attention to Green Lantern. Even the upcoming live-action TV show is relying on this. Yes, it's a standalone Green Lantern series, but it's being launched as a part of the first phase of the new DC cinematic universe, and the marketing stresses that it'll reveal something important for the rest of the shared universe going forward. So they're counting on a desire to know the whole story and see the big picture to make general audiences tune into a Green Lantern show even if they normally wouldn't watch it. What would you do with the Captain Britain Corps and/or Nova Corps? Both are basically Marvel's answer to Green Lantern, and nothing is being done with them. For anyone who doesn't know, the Captain Britain Corps is a giant team made up of every version of Captain Britain from every universe in the multiverse. I would go all in on the multiverse aspect of the Corps. Take Betsy Braddock, the current Captain Britain of the main 616 Marvel Universe, and give her a mission to find someone or something that's hidden away somewhere in the multiverse. Every issue can be Betsy in a different universe, interacting with that universe's Captain Britain, going on episodic single-issue adventures that would eventually build up to all the Captain Britons she met along the way coming to help her fight the final battle when the overarching story concludes. And if possible, I'd love it if every different universe had its own unique art style. I absolutely love it when they do that. For the Nova Corps, I think it could be interesting to shift their focus a little and make them explorers. It seems like the Marvel Universe is constantly threatened by beings that emerge from the farthest reaches of space and catch everyone off guard. Well, the Nova Corps is built for incredibly fast, deep space travel, so they should be out there mapping uncharted parts of the universe and making sure that the next big threat doesn't have the element of surprise. There's no limit to the kinds of people and environments the Novas could encounter, and the more creative they get, the better. Being a Green Lantern is often described as a job. Do the Lanterns get paid or get any kind of compensation for being a Lantern? They are strictly volunteers, which the Guardians use as an excuse for the poor way they run things, since any Green Lantern who doesn't like it is free to quit at any time. Monty2814 says, I always thought, particularly after the new Krypton story back in 2010, that a new Mosaic set on Earth would be an interesting concept. What do you think? That would be interesting, but it would lead to a fundamentally different kind of story. When Oa was the Mosaic world, it was a patchwork of cities and towns from dozens of different planets, all brought to this neutral alien world. In that situation, everyone on the planet is equally alien, including the humans. If you transport a number of alien cities to Earth, everyone who isn't human will be at an extreme disadvantage, and it becomes a story that's more about how we as a society deal with refugees. That doesn't mean it's a bad idea, and in fact, it probably should happen. The Steam Guru asks, do you think Psycho Pirate would be able to hamper a Green Lantern's ability to use their ring? If so, which Lantern would be best narratively to fight him, and could he be an archenemy to them? If Psycho Pirate wanted to, he could be one of the greatest threats to any Lantern Corps. His ability to control other people's emotions is a huge deal, because a Lantern's emotions are their power, or at least the key to using their power. All he has to do is decide to make a Green Lantern feel fear, and they will, which means their rings become hard to use. The Green Lanterns who would have the best chance at resisting Psycho Pirate's influence are probably Kyle and Jessica. Kyle has always been much more well-rounded emotionally than the other Green Lanterns. Yes, his willpower is strong, but he's also lived a life full of fear and hope and all the rest. It's why he was the only Lantern who could fight off Parallax's control during Green Lantern Rebirth, and it's why he had the potential to become a White Lantern through his own power. Similarly, Jessica's entire career as a Green Lantern has been focused on learning to deal with the extreme emotions that limit her, and fighting that internal battle every day should probably make her better prepared than most for Psycho Pirate's attack. And don't get me wrong, if they decided that Hal could exert enough willpower to just brute force his way through Psycho Pirate's influence, I'd buy it, because that's a very Hal thing to do. But beyond that, I'd put my money on Kyle and Jessica. Carlo Cortez asks, how would you introduce Razer and Aya into main canon? When Guy quit the Red Lantern Corps, he left it in the hands of Bleez and Rancor to do whatever they wanted with it. And even though being a Red Lantern has been a constant source of pain and misery, their time with Guy did show them that the Reds can do some real good in the universe, as long as the right people are in charge. And as a bonus, that series ended with Guy seemingly getting rid of the Red Ring's ability to kill you if you ever take the ring off. So maybe Bleez and Rancor have decided to slowly build a new Red Lantern Corps out of members they handpick and guide through the process. People who are angry for the right reasons and won't abuse the power like Atrocitus did. People like Razer. Aya would actually be even easier to bring in, since the Interceptor has already shown up a bunch of times over the years. All we need is an excuse for a Green Lantern to need a spaceship, like maybe they're going on a rescue mission in a region of space where strange radiation makes their rings unreliable, so they need a ship, and that ship's AI would become part of the team over the course of the mission. I don't think it would be all that hard to introduce Razer and Aya into the main canon, and it would be even easier to contrive a reason for them to cross paths after that. I'm just still not sure I want them to come into the comics. They were so good in the cartoon, and their story has such a sad yet hopeful ending. And then we got an even more hopeful epilogue in Young Justice years later. So I'm content with what we have. We've got a few questions here from D. What ring would you have Katma Tui wear if she wasn't a Green Lantern? A wedding ring. She and John deserve to be happy. How would you write a John Stewart book? It's funny to think about this right after the end of one John Stewart series and right before the start of the next John Stewart series. I want something that's fairly grounded, that pulls on some unresolved threads from John's past. So, John goes back to Earth and restarts his business, Shining Light Architecture, with a focus on building affordable housing for low-income families. And while that's good work that John believes in, it's just the part of the company that the public gets to know about. Behind closed doors, John is working to support the superhero community by building, upgrading, and maintaining secret hideouts. Sometimes superheroes move to a new city and need a new base of operations, or maybe their old base just got compromised. Villains are constantly finding ways to break into the most secure facilities like the Hall of Justice and the Fortress of Solitude, and sometimes a team's needs change as their membership grows. There have been passing references to John doing this sort of work before, but it's never been focused on, and it's a great way to have Green Lantern constantly interact with other heroes from all over the DC universe without it feeling like a forced crossover, and it all comes from John doing work that's in character. And it sets up some good potential drama, because I can't imagine that the DEO will like the fact that someone is covertly going around building secret fortresses for vigilantes. The Department of Extranormal Operations is a government agency that monitors all super people and tries to keep them from posing a threat to the public. And I think bunkers full of weapons and advanced technology hidden throughout major cities would probably qualify as something they'd want to get involved with. And to make matters even more complicated, the last time we saw her, John's ex-girlfriend Marin was applying to work for the DEO. John and Marin met when they both served on the Dark Stars, an intergalactic police force similar to the Green Lantern Corps. She came to Earth with him after the Dark Stars fell, but eventually left him so she could go out on her own and see this world for herself. Since no DEO agent knows John better than Marin, she'd be assigned to his case, and seeing her again after all this time would bring back a lot of unresolved feelings of love, regret, resentment, a longing for what once was and what might have been. The perfect cocktail of repressed negativity to make John's ultraviolet lantern power start to flare up for the first time since the Justice Doom War. These days we're used to seeing John as a very stoic guy who has it all under control, but one of his most vulnerable spots is his relationships. He's never truly moved on from Katma, he's always regretted losing Marin, and he's still trying to work out what his feelings for Fatality mean. So to have Marin suddenly walk back into his life, the emotional roller coaster it would send him on is outrageous, and that's before he realizes she's there to dismantle the business he's worked so hard to build. And we can literalize that internal conflict by seeing how John shifts back and forth from ultraviolet to green. Now, to be fair, at the time of this recording, John is an ascended being, and the closest thing we currently have to a Guardian, so his actual new series will likely be a lot more cosmic in nature. I wouldn't be surprised if we see him pick up where the last series left off with the strange new status quo on Oa, figuring out a brand new structure for how the greens, blues, and sapphires will coexist now that they all draw power from the same source on a single homeworld. And I'd love to see that too. I just think an Earth-centric series would be able to use more aspects of John's character and leverage more of his history for strong emotional beats. Who would you want on John's new team, the Watchtower? In his dream world, it consisted of Kyle Rayner, Natasha Irons, and Jason Todd, but those seem like very unlikely choices now. So in the Dark Crisis Green Lantern one-shot, John Stewart was trapped in a dream world where he was acting as a guardian with the support of a team called the Watchtower, which consisted of existing Green Lanterns like Kyle, as well as other Earth heroes with Green Lantern rings like Red Hood and Steel. According to the solicitations for Green Lantern number 2, it seems like we're going to see some version of that status quo in the real world. So what non-Lantern heroes would I pick for John's team? He would want the best possible intel, which means Barbara Gordon in her role as Oracle. He would want someone else who understands what it means to be both a superhero and a soldier, namely Captain Atom. And lastly, he would want an all-arounder who's useful in just about any situation. Someone who can handle themselves in a fight, but would prefer to resolve things peacefully. And he's a detective. It's Martian Manhunter. This is, of course, assuming that the Watchtower we get in reality is the same sort of concept as what we saw in the dream world. It's always possible that John is overseeing a new status quo on Oa, since he's literally the only Guardian left. Watchtower could be his name for the united green, blue, and violet lanterns as he tries to teach them to work together. Cyrus Burton asks, how do you think the Green Lantern Corps' role as a police/military force should be handled moving forward in a time when our own police and military do questionable things so often? While rereading the Johns run, I realized how blindly patriotic and pro-cop some of the Green Lantern runs are. I love the sci-fi mythos of Green Lantern, it's what makes them my favorite superheroes, but the aggressive military police force aspect makes it hard to fully enjoy sometimes. I'd love to see a conversation between the human lanterns about these topics. I think Simon and Joe would have a lot to say about how American police and the military treat people. I think it would be interesting to see how Hal, Guy, and John would react. As far as I'm concerned, those kinds of conversations between the characters should be the primary reason to keep the Green Lanterns as a police force. I've said before that I don't think Green Lanterns should be cops, but that's based on my view that the way they use the concept is severely flawed. Law enforcement is just like anything else, in that it exists in a moral and ethical gray area. Taking a stand and saying that all cops are bad or all cops are good oversimplifies the topic to the point that it hurts our ability to really explore the reasons why it is what it is. The reason I don't think Green Lanterns should be law enforcement is because DC always wants to have it both ways. They want the Corps to be cops and altruistic superheroes who always do the right thing, except for a few bad apples here and there. And I don't think that's good enough because it ignores the fact that this is a complicated topic. And I feel like I should say this again, to be clear, I am not anti-police. I just want to see a serious topic treated seriously. If DC doesn't want to do that, then the Green Lantern Corps should stop being a police force, stop being a military, and just be a gigantic team of superheroes. Cyrus Burton also asks, on a much less serious note, do you think Kyle's run from the 90s is worth reading all the way through? I just finished the 125-issue run of JLA that starts with Grant Morrison, and I like Kyle way more now. Also, do you know why they took him off the JLA? His last issue was JLA 76. I think every Green Lantern fan should read at least some of Kyle's stories, especially if you haven't read much Green Lantern from before 2005. Just know going in that it's a book from 30 years ago, so not everything is going to age well. But reading that run is still a worthwhile experience. Everything about that book is completely different from what we're used to getting from Green Lantern today. The look, the feel, the structure, the kinds of stories. There is no Green Lantern Corps. Kyle is a superhero, not a space cop. Hell, he rarely ever goes to space at all until close to the end of his series. I remember reading Green Lantern as a kid, and the only time I would ever see Kyle in space was in Grant Morrison's JLA, and even then it was only because the Justice League Watchtower was on the moon. As for why Kyle left the League, JLA number 76 comes right after the ending of the Brothers Keeper storyline in Green Lantern, where Kyle's friend Terry gets beaten nearly to death for being gay, and the fallout from that experience makes Kyle lose faith in humanity, so he leaves Earth for a while. This is when Kyle gives John a ring, making it the first time since Emerald Twilight that John Stewart has been a Green Lantern, and John watches over Earth while Kyle is away. And part of that responsibility is John taking Kyle's spot on the League. It may also be because issue 76 was the end of Joe Kelly's run as writer, since the end of one run and the beginning of another is always a good time to shuffle the roster, let some members leave to make room for new ones. Snow Golems asks, if a new Lantern type were to be created, new emotion, new everything, what type would you want it to be, and who would you want to see have a permanent ring of that color? Also, would it have any links to other ring types like blue and green do? I've always thought that a ring that was void of any emotion would be cool, and the only way for you to get rid of it would be putting on a purple ring, or an anxiety ring that had a special connection with yellow lanterns. I would make the Periwinkle Lantern of Joy. A lot of people online will tell you that joy is what powers the Gold Lantern, but all of those people are wrong. We have never been told what the Gold Lantern uses. I like joy in this context because it's very straightforward, and it plays off every other emotion in the spectrum in pretty obvious ways. It resonates strongly with hope, love, and compassion, but doesn't mix well at all with fear and rage. It would have a positive reaction to greed, since possessing the things you want can make you happy, but the positive effects would decrease over time as you become too greedy to actually appreciate what you already have. Since willpower is neutral, joy would not react to it at all. As for the actual interactions with these powers, I think it would be fun to do the reverse of a blue ring. Instead of a Periwinkle Lantern strengthening or weakening other kinds of rings, all of those other rings would strengthen or weaken the Periwinkle ring, depending on their relationship with joy. That makes sense to me, since your ability to feel happy is a byproduct of what all your other emotions are doing as they swirl around inside of you. Also, in addition to being a fun word to say, periwinkle is a mix of blue and purple, which for the purpose of the emotional spectrum would give joy aspects of hope and compassion, which sounds right to me. David Coro asks, what are your thoughts on Green Lantern getting a TV show instead of a movie? I think TV is a better fit for Green Lantern, especially if we want to see large portions of the mythology explored. A single season of television has more hours of screen time than a movie trilogy, and being broken up into a bunch of episodes makes it easier to spotlight more characters and storylines. The biggest downside to doing TV is that it likely won't have the budget of a Hollywood movie, or the ability to do the kinds of effects you'd get from something made for the big screen. But if you know that going in, all you have to do is not craft a story that requires those two things. If done right, Green Lantern could thrive on TV, as long as they play to the strengths of that medium. David Coro also asks, why do you think Green Lantern is not as popular as Batman or Spider-Man? I think that in general, characters like Spider-Man and Batman are easier to understand. Their origins, their powers, their street-level nature, all of it just sort of clicks right away. Whereas with Green Lantern, you've got all the weird sci-fi stuff, plus a bunch of magic, and the franchise doesn't always make an effort to ground itself in a world that's relatable to the audience. And when it does get relatable, you often have to dig through a few layers of weirdness to get there. We got a few here from Anthony Manns. What war or event do you think made it so that there are no lanterns in the Legion's time? And do you think Rainbow Girl and the Eye of Ekron are byproducts of it? If we take into account what we saw happen over the course of Geoffrey Thorne's run in the previous volume of Green Lantern, the United Planets has been growing and becoming more self-sufficient at the same time that the Green Lantern Corps is in decline. So it could just be that as the United Planets continues to get bigger and stronger, fewer and fewer worlds need the protection of independent contractors like the Green Lantern Corps. And honestly, the Corps is constantly on the verge of being obliterated. And that's not even taking into account all of the times that the Corps has actually fallen. I'm not sure what it would take to wipe out the Green Lantern Corps permanently, without anyone ever trying to bring it back. Unless it's somehow a choice made by the Guardians and the Lanterns themselves. to step down and step away, maybe because the universe legitimately doesn't need them anymore, which is highly unlikely. After Emerald Twilight, the Corps was only able to come back because one Guardian and one Ring survived, and even then, it was a decade before the Corps could be properly rebuilt. So maybe next time the Corps gets destroyed, or the time after that, or the time after that, the good guys aren't so lucky, and there isn't anyone left to pick up the pieces. No torchbearer, no return. I think Rainbow Girl is a sign that no matter what happens to the lanterns of every color, the emotional spectrum will continue to exist as long as there's life in the universe, and it'll occasionally find a way to express itself. Whereas the Emerald Empress is a reminder of how dangerous Guardian technology can be in the wrong hands, and it makes me wonder what else was scavenged after the final fate of the Corps. What do you think Steam Lantern's Rogues Gallery looks like? If you could give a lantern a trilogy or story like Batman Vampire, which monster and lantern would you use and why? So the Steam Lantern is a character from an episode of Green Lantern the Animated Series. His real name is Gil Broom, named after Gil Kane and John Broom, the creative team that started the Silver Age of Green Lantern. He's the protector of an alternate steampunk universe, so the question is, what villains would be fun to reimagine with a steampunk aesthetic? My first thought is to go with anyone who uses technology, like Black Hand. Instead of using a sleek handheld device to absorb and redirect lantern power, it would be a massive machine that absorbs Steam Lantern's energy and uses it to reanimate dead bodies in the local cemetery. And of course, you'd have to do the Manhunters. I'm picturing something big and clunky with design elements of the Big Daddy from BioShock. As for a Green Lantern version of the Batman Vampire concept, I'd go with Frankenstein's Lantern. In an attempt to make the ultimate Green Lantern, a Mad Guardian combines the bodies of dead Green Lanterns into one hulking being, so that the willpower of all of them can combine into one unstoppable force. Obviously, it rebels against its creator and goes on a rampage, before playing out something pretty similar to the classic Frankenstein story with a cosmic twist. What kind of team would Guy Gardner build with no oversight? I think something between Titans Academy and Justice League International, a place where heroes like him could shine. Guy would want to use this as an opportunity to prove his worth to everyone, while also giving a group of people just like him an honest shot at the big leagues without anyone holding them back or pushing them down. They would be the JLW, short for Justice League Warriors. Their headquarters would be Guy's bar until they come up with something better. As for members, there's Guy Gardner, obviously, but then there's Artemis. She once had the opportunity to be Wonder Woman, and was bad at it. She failed. She was too violent and arrogant. Neither the superhero community or the general public ever accepted her. Artemis is someone who Guy can relate to a lot. People always used to look at him as some second-string knockoff of the quote-unquote real Green Lantern, and for the longest time he defined himself with a crude and violent attitude. He'd look at Artemis as a kindred spirit and try to give her advice and guidance. Harley Quinn. She's done a lot of terrible things, but she's been putting in the work to try and be one of the good guys. But she's still got a lot of work to do. Guy would be particularly interested in the fact that Harley has been working with Batman for a while now, yet Batman still keeps her at a distance and won't officially acknowledge her as his partner. The idea that Guy Gardner could succeed at turning Harley Quinn into a full-blown superhero when Batman couldn't is just too good of an opportunity for Guy to pass up. He would never let Batman forget it, if it works. Captain Cold. He's got a strong moral code and is always teetering on the edge of being one of the good guys. Hell, he was already a member of the Justice League for a while. Maybe all he needs to finally make good is the right environment and the support of a team that's all about showing the world how good they can be. And lastly, Ice. That's right, this team's going to have two people with cold powers, but that doesn't matter. Guy would want Ice to be there because he's always better when she's by his side. She's the one person on the team without anything to prove, which will cause some conflict with the others at first, but ultimately her influence and example will be good for everyone, including Guy. Who or what lantern do you think is on the team in the Elseworld story Justice League, Gods and Monsters? So Justice League Gods and Monsters is a world where a group of familiar side characters lead tragic lives that result in them becoming their world's Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. Superman is the son of General Zod and was raised on Earth by human parents who weren't the Kents, instilling different values and giving him a totally different relationship with his powers. Batman is Kirk Langstrom, the scientist we know as Man-Bat, but this version of him became a vampire as the result of failed medical research. Wonder Woman is Becca of New Genesis, who fled to Earth after Highfather used her wedding to Darkseid's son Orion as an opportunity to slaughter his enemies. In keeping with the spirit of those three, I think the character I would pick to be Green Lantern in that world is Krona, the Mad Guardian, and we wouldn't have to actually change very much about his story. The way it worked out in the original story is that Krona's experiment unleashed evil throughout the universe, so the Guardians exiled him and created the Green Lantern Corps to restore order. For the Gods and Monsters version, I changed it a little. Krona still does his experiment, and it still unleashes evil throughout the universe, but this time the Guardians make him into the one and only Green Lantern, making him personally responsible for undoing the damage his experiment caused throughout the universe. His ring can never come off until the job is complete, and it constantly compels him to move on to the next crisis that requires his attention. Freedom to roam the universe becomes his prison because he's unable to stop or go home until his endless task is finished. Death Alchemist asks, Kyle has had a few different designs. Do you have a favorite one? It might be the boring answer, but I have to go with his original one, and it has to have his unique logo. It just never looks right to me to have the Green Lantern Corps logo on Kyle's 1990s costume. It's such a good design. It's sleek and minimalistic, and looks modern enough that you'd never know it was almost 30 years old. Just slap the classic symbol on the front and we're good to go. Booty Capital asks, do you have any favorite issues of Green Lantern that you love and would recommend? I've been recently reading Emerald Twilight onwards from 1990 to 2004 for the first time, and I'm absolutely loving it. I'll tell you the two that come to mind immediately. Green Lantern Volume 3, number 53. This is the issue where Kyle and Superman team up to fight Mongol. The whole issue is an awesome fight scene with amazing Darryl Banks artwork, and it holds a special place in my heart for being the first issue of Green Lantern I ever read. This issue was so much fun, and it left me with so many questions, which drove me to keep reading more, and that's how I got here today. The other one is Green Lantern Corps Recharge number 1. This is the first issue of the miniseries that re-established the Corps after they've been gone for a decade. This issue kinda has everything. It spotlights 2 human Green Lanterns, we see them with the Justice League, we see them go to Oa, we get multiple veteran Lanterns doing their thing, we're introduced to multiple new recruits in a way that very clearly and concisely tells us everything we need to know about them and the worlds they come from, and the final few pages end on a note that's extremely hopeful for the future, while also giving off very ominous vibes for things to come. Most of the things that I love about Green Lantern are in this issue somewhere, and even though it's part 1 of a 5-issue miniseries, it reads perfectly fine as a standalone one-shot. And lastly, Webhead asks, is there an aspect of the Green Lantern mythos you would like to see rewritten or explored more? Personally, I've always been dissatisfied with the Star Sapphires, since I've always found their perception of love to be possessive and self-centered. I'm sure people are tired of hearing me bring it up by now, but the White Lantern Corps flew out into space at the end of Green Lantern New Guardians and have not been seen or heard from since. Half a dozen White Lanterns have been out there since 2015. They have access to the full emotional spectrum. They could be anywhere. They could be doing anything. I can't think of a better example of a concept with infinite potential that's being completely wasted. As for what I'd rewrite, that would have to be a large portion of Aricia's history. Get rid of her crush on Hal, get rid of her artificially aging her body so they can be a couple, get rid of her death. The character gains nothing at all from having those events as part of her past, and modern Green Lantern comics ignore all of those deeply problematic stories anyway, so they may as well not be there. And that's it! all questions have been answered. If you have anything to add to any of these topics, or you have your own questions that you'd like answered next time, don't hesitate to write it all down in the comment section of this video. I look forward to seeing what you all have to say. So until next time, thank you for taking the time to watch. My name is Dan. We'll talk again soon.